Welcome back to A Knight's Tale. We're all just in time for another one. Don't forget to comment and like the video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We got a whole lot more checkmates to get into. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, looks like the king is preparing the troops for battle. He seems to have an insatiable appetite for another checkmate. Stockfish is boasting a level 7 out of 8 and the king has a plan. He's up on the mountain, having a chat with 2 pawns from the kingdom. Priscilla, a very cunning warrior, and her sister Patricia, Petty, they call her. I once thought she was a direct descendant of Michael Corvinus himself. Let's listen in.
Priscilla and Patricia, valiant warriors, born to be pawns on the chess battlefield. Today, we are preparing even now to surge over the edge of glory, poised to etch our names in a knight's tale for all time. Your valor knows no bounds. Your bravery stands tall as a beacon in our darkest hours, forming a strong bond within our ranks through the crucible of combat. Priscilla, you are the shadow's dance, the silent strike amidst chaos, tasked with infiltrating the heart of our enemy's side of the board. Patricia, your strength was, is, and will always be the bedrock of our defense, a force to quake the very earth. Lead our charge once more, divert their attention to the mastery you so skillfully wield your sword with, and pave Priscilla's path to triumph. We hang our hopes and dreams at the tip of your spear, forging our saga's next chapter against adversity's tide. Godspeed.
White pawn. Full-on challenges with e4, we respond with c5, asserting control over the center, preparing for potential Sicilian defense. White knight ventures out to f3. Our knight joins the open with c6, establishing a solid defense and preparing for possible counterattacks. White pushes their pawn to d4, daring me to capture. I'm not one to back down from a challenge. Pawn takes d4. White's knight swoops in to capture on d4. I advance a pawn to e6. White knight to c3, eyeing my d5 square. I block their plans with our knight to f6. White gets somewhat aggressive with their knight to b5, aiming for a check on c7. So, let's develop our bishop to b4, pinning their knight in place. White bishop moves to f4. We taking the pawn on e4. You could almost set your watch to this. It's a surprise move from white, sacrificing their knight for a check on c7. My king to f8. White queen moves to f3. Black knight captures on c3. White pawn captures on c3. I move to f6. White castles kingside. Bishop checks on a3, forcing their king to dance. White king retreats to b1, trying to find shelter. Rook to b8. I might need him to support Petty on the b-file later. The battle intensifies as White's knight leaps to b5, but we counter with a pawn thrust to e5, disrupting their fortification in the middle of the board. White bishop captures on e5, but I strike back. Queen takes f3, a beautiful sacrifice in the grand scheme. White pawn captures on f3. We need to find another queen. Our knight captures on e5. Their knight leaps to a3, taking our bishop. He was putting pressure on the king. Pawn to a6, setting up our defenses and forcing later decision-making. White rook moves to d5, aiming to infiltrate my ranks. Pawn to d6, blocking their path. White pawn advances to f4. Black knight moves to g6. White rook captures on d6. I'll reluctantly sacrifice a pawn to improve king's safety. King to e7, out of harm's way. White rook moves back to d4, but I counter with our own rook to d8, ready to defend. The tension mounts as White's rook captures on d8. We accept the exchange. Our king captures on d8. White's rook now advances to g1, aiming for the open file. Petty springs into the action, moving to b5, setting up a strong pawn structure with rooks supporting. You can see the advantage tip our way because of position when White's bishop moves to d3. Petty to b4. We gotta be closing them ranks over there, Petty warrior. White knight moves to c4. Petty captures on passant on c3, and provides a discover check by the bishop on b2. White king retreats to c1. I push up. Rook to b4, targeting their exposed pawns. White pawn advances. a3. Rook moves on to a4, trying to impede gaining ground in the endgame. White knight moves to e3. This was a mistake. King b1 was best. Rook captures on a3, putting pressure on their position. King dances between c1 and b1. Bishop to e6, eyeing potential weaknesses in their position. White bishop moves to f1. A blunder. Bishop taking on g6 was better. Our knight moves to h4. White rook moves to g3. Bishop checks on a2, keeping their king on the run. White king dances between c1 and b1 once more. Bishop to c4, maintaining the pressure. White king moves to b1. He's OD elusive. On my soul. Bishop checks on a2. White king moves to c1. On your mark. Bishop moves to d5. White king retreats to d1. He got them Johns laced up. Bishop checks on f3. White rook takes on f3. Knight takes f3. White king moves to e2. He's running gassers during a war? Black knight moves to h2. White bishop moves to g2. Rook moves to a4. White knight retreats to d1. Rook captures on f4, gaining ground in the endgame. White knight captures petty on c3. She was such a fine warrior. Knight to g4, threatening their king's safety. White pawn advances to f3. Black knight moves to f6. White king retreats to d3. Your boy is an Olympian. Rook to b4. White knight jumps to a2. Rook moves to b1. White pawn advances to f4. Prissy to h5. The king said you would be useful in battle. For some reason he likes you. Petty already set the sacrificial diversion. White bishop moves to f3. Pawn to a5, gaining ground on the queen side. They're going to have to make a decision. White knight moves to c3. Rook to b4. White bishop moves to d5. Knight captures on d5, hoping for the opportunity to gain ground, but white's knight captures on d5. Rook to b2. White knight moves to e3. Rook moves to b1. White king moves to e4. Prissy advances to h4. White king retreats to f3. Sprinter of the year. Rook moves to g1. White king moves to f2. Rook moves to c1. White knight moves to f5. Rook captures on c2, putting their king in check. White king moves to f3. What is going on, Stockfish? Prissy advances to h3. White knight moves to e3. Another mistake. At this point, checkmate is unavoidable. Knight d4 was best. Rook moves to c3. You have got to be on the left side of kidding me, brah. White pawn advances to f5. Blunder. 2 times. King f2 was better. Rook takes on e3 check. White king pushed to f4. Yeah, I saw that too. Black rook moves to a3. White king moves to e4. Black pawn advances to h2. She's going to do it. White pawn advances to f6. Black pawn captures on f6. White king moves to f5. Black king moves to e7. White king moves to g4? Really? King to e4 was best. Prissy moved to h1 and gets promoted to a queen. Welcome to the knight's inner circle. Prepare to shake a tail feather. White king don't know what to do. Prissy to f3. Checkmate. Looks like we found another queen. All hail Queen Priscilla. A Knight's Tale definitely put that level 7 Stockfish on the run. For more stories, like and comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe to A Knight's Tale and hit that notification bell for the equation. See you next time.